Happy Friday, middle schoolers. We're already to the end of our first week of distance learning, and we are on now day 4 of workshop 3. And today we're going to start the short story, The Lottery. And when we look at this short story, we're going to be really focusing on the literary elements, which just means the parts of the story. Remember, literary means a piece of literature, so a text that you would read. Elements are parts. So we're going to open up to page 132 up at the top, and it gives a brief explanation about each of those parts. Okay, and that is going to help us with our learning target of I can identify setting, character, plot, and theme in a story. So we have first the setting, so I'm on number 1. Okay, where and when the story takes place, also called time and place. And in the lottery today, we're going to look at a town in the summertime. Okay. Then we have the characters, and in our story, characters are who the story is mostly about. The townspeople are going to be the characters. There's going to be some that have a little bit more of a part than others. Okay. Then we have plot. Plot is a sequence of events. It also includes the problem or the conflict. And if you think about the sequence of events, it can be things you would describe first, middle, last, or the beginning, middle, and end. And then theme is that important message that the author wants us to understand as the reader. Okay. In the lottery, one of the themes is that following a tradition without considering its consequences, meaning what can happen, can be dangerous. Okay. So let's go ahead and open to page 134. Okay, you can follow along with me on the slideshow here or on your paper pencil packet. Okay. And in this story called The Lottery, first just think about, okay, what is a lottery? And we know it's one of our vocabulary words that we started this week, which means a system when something is chosen by a way of chance. So sometimes even thinking about like when I pull sticks in the classroom, that's kind of a lottery. It's just by chance whose name gets picked. It's not if someone has their name in there more times or not. And usually when we think of something a lottery, it's usually something that is good if your name gets called or gets picked. And like when you win the lottery, you would want your chances to be well. Okay. And actually in this story, the lottery is actually a big part of the conflict or the problem. So just kind of keep that in your mind as we start. We're just going to read the beginning part of it today, so from 134 to 137. And as we look deeply or a little bit closer at these elements are really going to help us understand the story as we read it. But for the first time through, I just want you to focus on what's happening in this beginning, what's happening in the beginning part of this story. Okay. As we read, there are several new words that you may not know, so I'll stop briefly and just explain those. You'll also see them at the bottom of the page. Okay. The Lottery by Shirley Jackson, starting on page 134. Paragraph 1. The morning of June 27th was clear and sunny, with the fresh warmth of a full summer day. The flowers were blossoming profusely, and the grass was richly green. And so now at the bottom of the page, you see that word profusely, which means in large amounts or abundantly. So the flowers are growing really well, and there's a lot of them. Second sentence. The people of the village began to gather in the square, and square is just like the center of town, between the post office and the bank. Around 10 o'clock, in some towns, there were so many people that the lottery took 2 days and had to be started on June 26th. But in this village, where there were only about 300 people, the whole lottery took less than 2 hours, so it could begin at 10 o'clock in the morning and still be through in time to allow the village to get home for noon dinner. The children assembled first, and there we have another new word, assembled, gathered together. School was recently over for this summer, and the feeling of liberty sat uneasily on most of them, liberty which means freedom. They tended, which means usually, to gather together quietly for a while before they broke into boisterous play, noisy or rowdy play. And their talk was still of the classroom and the teacher, of books and reprimands. Bobby Martin had already stuffed his pockets full of stones, and the other boys soon followed his example, selecting the smoothest and roundest stones. Bobby and Harry Jones and Dickie Delacoy, the village pronounces his name, Delacoy, eventually made a great pile of stones in one corner of the square and guarded against the raids of the other boys. The girls stood aside, talking amongst themselves, looking over their shoulders at the boys, and the very small children rolled in the dust or clung to the hands of their older brothers and sisters. Paragraph 3. Soon the men began to gather, surveying their own children, speaking of planting and rain, tractors and taxes. They stood together, away from the pile of stones in the corner, and their jokes were quiet, and they smiled rather than laughed. The women, wearing faded house dresses and sweaters, came shortly after their menfolk. They greeted one another and exchanged bits of gossip as they went to join their husbands. Soon the women, standing by their husbands, began to call to the children, and the children came reluctantly, having to be called 4 or 5 times. Bobby Martin ducked under his mother's grasping hand and ran, laughing, back to the pile of stones. His father spoke up sharply, and Bobby came quickly and took his place between his father and his oldest brother. I wonder why there is so much talk of stones in these first 2 pages. Let's go ahead and turn the page to 136, 137. The lottery was happened, as were the square dances, the teenage club, the Halloween program, by Mr. Summers, who had time and energy to devote to civic activities. So there's another new word, devote, means gives all the time or attention. To civic means things of a society working together. He was a round-faced, jovial, or happy man, and he ran the coal business, and the people were sorry for him because he had no children and his wife was a scold. When he arrived in the square, carrying the black wooden box, there was a murmur of conversation among the villagers, and he waved and called, "Little late today, folks!" The postmaster, Mr. Graves, followed him, carrying a 3-legged stool, and the stool was put in the center of the square, and Mr. Summers sent the black box down on it. The villagers kept their distance, leaving a space between themselves and the stool, and when Mr. Summers said, "Some of you fellows want to give me a hand?" there was a hesitation before 2 men. Mr. Martin and his oldest son, Baxter, came forward to hold the box steady on the stool, while Mr. Summers stirred up the papers inside it. Okay, so we know this is kind of a big day. Everyone's gathering to see what's going on. But it doesn't seem like anybody wants to see what's in the box. So if you think about like when you start opening presents on your birthday and people gather around, everybody gets really close, right? Like almost too close because they want to see what's in there. But the way these characters are acting, they're all kind of keeping their distance and no one wants to hold the box. Makes me really wonder what's inside the box. Paragraph 5. The original paraphernalia for the lottery had been lost long ago, and the black box, now resting on the stool, had been put into use even before Old Man Warner, the oldest man in town, was born. So it makes me think whatever happens with this box has happened for a long, long time, since the original was lost, and now they've got this other one that they use. Mr. Summers spoke frequently to the villagers about making a new box, but no one liked to upset even as much tradition as was represented by the black box. There was a story that the present box had been made with some pieces of the box that had preceded it, or the one that came before it. The one that had been constructed when the first people settled down to make a village here. Every year after the lottery, Mr. Summers began talking again about a new box, but every year the subject was allowed to fade off without anything being done. The black box grew shabbier each year, or like more worn down. By now it was no longer completely black, but splintered badly along one side to show the original wood color, and in some places faded or stained. Paragraph 6. Mr. Martin and his oldest son Baxter held the black box securely on the stool until Mr. Summers had stirred the papers thoroughly with his hand. So there's another new word, to do something completely in a careful way, thoroughly. So it's these papers that are in the box, he's really stirring them up. I wonder why people don't want to see the papers in there. Maybe they already know what's on these papers. Because so much of the ritual had been forgotten or discarded, Mr. Summers had been successful in having the slips of paper substituted for the chips of wood that had been used for generations. Chips of wood, Mr. Summers had argued, had been all very well when the village was tiny, but now the population was more than 300 and likely to keep on growing. It was necessary to use something that would fit more easily into the black box. The night before the lottery, Mr. Summers and Mr. Graves made up the slips of paper and put them in the box, and then it was taken to the safe of Mr. Summers' coal company and locked up until Mr. Summers was ready to take it to the square the next morning. The rest of the year, the box was put away, sometimes one place, sometimes another. It had spent 1 year in Mr. Graves' barn and another year underfoot in the post office, and sometimes it was set on a shelf in the Martin grocery and left there. Okay, we're going to stop there. This is the very beginning of our story. And I just want you to quick think about, okay, what did happen in the beginning of this story? We know that the villagers are gathering for a lottery. Okay? And if you think about this lottery, do you think the villagers are excited for it? Do you think they don't care about it? Do you think that it leaves a question about what's going to happen? Okay. When I think about all of the things that go with this lottery, how they're not super excited to see what's in the box, or how they kind of hesitate and everybody kind of murmurs and is kind of quiet as it's getting ready to go. And then they talk about taking care of the box and they don't really take care of it. Kind of makes me wonder why they continue to do it. Or if they don't want to, why would they wouldn't want to make it better? So kind of keep a couple of those questions in your mind as we continue on next week. Okay? And also just keep in mind also, okay, thinking about the beginning of our story, we know there are villagers gathering for a lottery, and the tone or the mood is kind of serious. Doesn't have a lot of excitement. It's almost just a kind of a, not so much a mysterious, but everybody seems to be wondering what's going to happen with the lottery. Okay? The last thing to do for today and this week is make sure you have your work submitted from this week. No new assignment to submit today. It's just to listen to the story or read it on your own. Make sure you have your first 4 assignments into me because you'll be getting grades this weekend just like I would normally do. Okay? And if you've got them completed and you've did them accurately, you can expect a good grade. If I don't see anything from you by tomorrow, Saturday, I'm probably going to try to reach out to you with a phone call or email. So just expect that. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. You can give me a call, leave me a message even at school because I'll get back to you. Or you can certainly give me an email or through Google Classroom. Either of those ways. Otherwise, I hope you have a great weekend. I sure miss ya. Take care. Be safe. Love ya. Bye.